Cassidy was a 21-year-old woman who had previously lived in Ealing before she was kicked out by her family and had to move north. She didn't often think about her family anymore. She missed them, even if they didn't always accept of who she was, although she would never miss her father. She missed her brother especially, though. They'd grown up together and shared such a close bond when they were little. Cassidy knew that he accepted her, and maybe one day, just hopefully, they'd see each other again. Cassidy had always been a great fan of science fiction. She'd grown up an avid fan of Star Trek and Red Dwarf, but never in a million years had she expected to live in one of her wildest fantasies. Her room was quite tidy considering her busy and hectic life. She had lived in quite a small flat, which she just about managed to pull together with the odds and ends of her photography career, as well as the help of her former editor and best friend, Rani Chandra. She worked her way through her usual morning routine, which involved casting away her duvet and switching on the TV to get the latest news and headlines. She would then go to the kettle and make a cup of coffee and crumpets. Cassidy always looked more tired than she was, because she felt her life was so dull and uninteresting. She yearned for a more exciting life, a life of magic, adventure and danger. The kettle clicked after an intense 2 minutes of boiling away ferociously, like a trapped tiger. Cassidy was just filling her mug when she heard the story of a fallen star on the news. They were reporting that it was some kind of meteor, but it hadn't left any kind of scorch marks at the crash site. Yet the officials were certain something fell through the atmosphere at precisely 12:02 a.m. this morning. They did, however, find a strange tubular object at the scene. It looked like some kind of strange alien artifact with cracked porcelain edges, a purple crystal emitter, and tough metal claws holding it all together. The handle was certainly starting to show its age, as the thumbhole looked like it was about to snap off. Cassidy thought it was totally worth investigating, so she forwarded the article on her news app to Rani and turned the TV off. In doing so, she put down her phone and reached for her coffee, only to realise she'd dropped it and would have to make another cup. A shard of ceramic had sliced her arm open, so she quickly reached for some stitches to sew up her wound. She looked down at the coffee. It reached into all corners of the floor, and almost looked like a vacant face, staring right back at her. Cassidy paused for a moment, looking down at the spillage before mopping it up. At 9:45 a.m, Cassidy was ready to go out to work. She had a meeting with her editor at around 10:30, and she was sure that if she was late this time, her head would definitely be on the chopping board. She had already missed the deadline for her last selection of photographs of the latest government prick, who had promises they knew they couldn't deliver. So instead, Cassidy had been out with Rani looking into strange UFO sightings. She hoped that her boss would share her interest in the event, because she desperately needed to keep her job, as she was already behind on her payments for her flat. And if she missed another payment, she'd get kicked out by her landlord. This was when she hit a stroke of luck. As she exited her flat, slamming the door behind her, some student had been giving out leaflets, and one of them had landed on her doormat. Normally, Cassidy would usually discard these, but she saw that the company in question was a Zygote Industries. A peculiar name, she thought to herself. They were looking for volunteers to give DNA samples. The leaflet looked very professional, like a posh hotel brochure. There was even a cash payment of £50,000, which would be more than enough to cover her flat payments for the month, and buy herself a new camera, which would hopefully mean she'd be able to get work outside the local paper. The paper in question was the Newcastle Chronicle, which was often handed outside train stations and immediately thrown into the bin by commuters. Cassidy had checked to make sure she had her keys, which were attached to a pink, blue and white lanyard around her neck, which was almost smoothed down by her pins of Disney characters, and even a Starfleet logo or two. Once Cassidy had locked up, she put her on her leather jacket and fastened her brown boots and ambled her way down the stairs of the bygone city monolith of a tower of people packed together like a long-forgotten sardines, and down to her bus stop. Once she got on the bus, she was greeted by an old lady who took the bus every day to see her grandchildren. Her daughter had been ill and she'd been offering to babysit. Cassidy felt so bad for her, and so she brought her a coffee when they got off their bus in central town and parted ways for work. There was an unsettling air about the place as Cassidy walked through the bustling crowds and to her offices. A dark, foreboding wind encompassed the city. Cassidy could feel like it was a storm brewing. When she reached her offices, she looked up to the sky to see grey and bitter clouds looking down at her from above as she entered the cold and empty offices. It was strange. Cassidy looked at her watch. It was 10:15. Usually at this point the offices were crowded with people going to and fro, but not today. Cassidy went to the offices to sign in, but still no one was there. Not even Tish, who was a secretary who worked on weekdays. Must be a bank holiday or something, Cassidy reasoned in her mind. Just as she was about to exit again, Cassidy thought she might as well give the office a try and see who was in. So, she turned around to make a move for the lift. She pressed the button on the left to summon the lift down. It took an unusually long time before it arrived, but once it did, Cassidy immediately got in and pressed the button to take her to floor 10. The doors closed behind her, and once she was out of view, a fluid blob-like monster took the shape as Tish, the secretary. The lift arrived from the 10th floor, and the doors opened. Cassidy walked out, slightly on edge, taking her steps slowly, hoping anyone would pop out and say good morning to her. Even Janet the janitor was nowhere to be seen. Cassidy found her mop leaning against a wall, desolate and forgotten. As Cassidy looked closer at the wall, she noticed that dripping down the wall was a lurid orange goo, which trickled gently down the wall. Cassidy was repulsed, yet couldn't find the urge to reach in and touch it. She felt its texture was like some kind of PVA glue or cheap kids' goo. It was sticky, and so she decided to rub it off on her jeans. She noticed a familiar-looking sign. The Zygote logo from the leaflet she had found on her doormat that morning was an almost monocle-looking logo, clearly designed to vaguely represent that of a zygote cell. They were clearly new in town, and Cassidy wondered if maybe perhaps they had something to do with the odd behaviour in the office that morning. That was when, at last, her boss called her into the office. "Cassidy, you're early," he said in a slightly bemused manner, yet also completely vacant of expression. Cassidy looked round to see what appeared to be almost a shell of her boss. He seemed to look exactly as he normally did. His loose tie, piercing belt and suit was all present, his scruffy hair and wrinkled face as normal, yet something seemed off. Like his posture, for instance. He never stood upright, he always slouched back like a sloth. Not to mention the smell. He'd never been the greatest smelling guy in the first place, but even now he stank of something unpleasant. It made Cassidy's nostrils flare up like a firework. "Are you feeling well, Cassidy?" he asked stiffly. Cassidy was unsure, so she simply shrugged and said, "I'm okay, I guess." Cassidy had the photos in a plastic wallet, which she had got out in the lift. "Are those the photos?" her boss demanded to know. Contemplated Cassidy as she debated it on her mind whether to hand the photos over or not. "Yeah, I guess," she said as she slowly raised the photos towards her boss, only for him to grab her by the arm and take them. Cassidy quickly moved her arm away as she backed away slowly. "I've given everyone the day off. You can go into town and do some fluid consumption," suggested her boss, in a dark, commanding voice. Cassidy expressed her confusion. "Do you mean go out for a drink or something?" Yes, run along, fellow human," said her boss as he went back into his office. Cassidy was about to call the lift and go home when she decided to do some nosy looking around. She pushed on the door opposite to her boss's office and into Zygote Incorporated. Inside, the office was empty, no desks or swivelly chairs, not a free pen or photocopier in sight. Cassidy did find traces of what looked like more of that strange goo on the walls, though. She also found a giant sign on the wall featuring the Zygote logo, as well as the name of their government sponsor. Servu. Cassidy was about to leave when out came a nurse. He was tall and quite well built up. He struck quite an intimidating figure, really. While he smiled away, Cassidy couldn't help but think, what if there was some malicious force awake within him? "Have you come to volunteer?" he said bluntly. Cassidy remembered that they were genetic engineers and just decided to go along with it. Yeah, I am. "Would you please come with me?" he commanded. Cassidy felt a sense within her telling her to get the hell out of there. She went against her better judgment and followed him into the practice room at the end of the office. Inside, the nurse took out a rather large needle and told her to take a seat on the operating chair. She noticed there were straps on the arms of the chair. She wondered what possible use they could have for them. The nurse took the needle and injected it deep within her vein to draw the blood. Cassidy noticed that close up on their face, the nurse had a small yet visible red-looking sucker, almost like the kind you'd find on an octopus tentacle. Cassidy dismissed this as merely acne or something. The nurse withdrew the needle and handed her a cheque for £50,000. "Thank you very much for your donation. We shall find it very useful," the nurse stated, like it was almost reading off a script or a manual. "Is that it? 50 grand for that?" "Your donation will mean more to my bosses than that small amount. Please leave," the nurse stated. "If you say so. Have a nice day then, I guess," Cassidy said, trying to be as polite as possible, so as not to let on how nervous she was. Cassidy noticed an organic-looking door behind a plastic curtain. It looked like it could have been made from some kind of genetic cross between a raw beef burger and tree weeds. "What's through there?" Cassidy inquired. "It is of no consequence to you. Please leave now," the nurse commanded, as he showed Cassidy out of Zygote HQ and down the lift. Once Cassidy exited the lift, she saw Tish. She waved at her to say hi, but she was met with no reply. Cassidy guessed that she should leave, but something was clearly wrong. That was when she got a text from Rani. It simply read, "We need to meet. Now." It was now later in the afternoon, and Cassidy was at her favourite coffee shop, Pink Lane Coffee, eating a bagel and taking soft sips of her flat white. She was sat on a brown leather sofa, waiting for Rani to turn up. She was coming in via train, so it was bound to take a little while. Cassidy kept running the events of the day through her head. It all seemed so strange. Something was definitely wrong. But who could she tell? The police would probably think she was crazy. She had to rely on Rani. She'd dealt with stuff like this before, with her friend Sarah Jane. Some of the stories she told were mad, like the Mona Lisa coming to life, or the trickster. But Cassidy was starting to debate if maybe, after all, it was all true. Finally, Rani arrived. She was a tall and confident woman, and she filled the room with her vibrant clothing choices and charming smile. She was carrying a red satchel and a large black ring binder folder. Rani went over to a white-tiled bar to order a vegan cappuccino and paid for this with a contactless card and put a little change in the donations box, before going to sit down next to Cassidy on the sofa. "Hi," Rani greeted Cassidy like a close friend, although a great amount of time had passed since they last met. Cassidy returned the greeting. "Hi, long time no see." "I think we've been overdue a chat, especially given the circumstances," Rani replied, as she organised her things onto a table and almost knocking her bagel onto the floor. "Yeah, I've missed you. Everything was so much better when you were my editor," Cassidy said, trying to cover up the fact that she'd been struggling to make ends meet since Rani's paper closed. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to help, but when Sky vanished, I've been working round the clock to find her. But when I saw that article you sent me, I knew I needed to see you," Rani explained, noticing a slight tension in Cassidy's voice. Cassidy was a bit upset that it took a few flying saucers to bring Rani back to her, given how close friends they'd once been. "Well, you're here now, and I guess it's okay. It's really not. I should have been here a long time ago. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Rani said in a guilty tone. Cassidy smiled through shallow tears, remembering being kicked out by her family and not having her best friend there for her. It had been tough, but at least they were back together. "How's your brother?" Rani inquired. Still with them, Cassidy said as she rolled back another tear. I think he's afraid of what they might do if he left them, but we text sometimes. I am really sorry, I really did let you down as your best friend, Rani said. If there's anything I can do, just let me know, I'm going to be here for you from now on, I promise. Cassidy pulled herself together with a tough, unbeaten smile. Right, enough of the dramatics, let's get down to business. Right, declared Rani as she spread open her folder. This is the facts that I've gathered so far. At some time after midnight, locals in Newcastle spotted a strange glowing energy above Newcastle Tower before landing somewhere in the centre of town. But there's no markings or anything. Rani pointed to an area at the centre of the map with lots of offices and a street near Quayside. This was particularly notable for Cassidy, as that was where she worked. That's not possible. I worked there and there was nothing there. However, there was something odd about the atmosphere there this morning. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on, remarked Cassidy, as she recalled the bizarre events of the morning. It was like the whole office was dead, and everyone was acting like zombies. Rani sat back as her cappuccino arrived. She put her finger on her chin as she thought about what Cassidy was saying. Was there anything significantly different? Rani asked. Yeah, said Cassidy as she took a deep gulp of her coffee. There was this new company that moved in. Zygote Incorporated, she explained as she reached for a leaflet that she picked up this morning. They deal in genetic engineering or something, she said as she passed it over to Rani. Interesting, Rani expressed as she flicked through a leaflet. You didn't take a peek inside, did you? Well, you know me. Of course I did, Cassidy replied. But it was well freaky. There was this nurse and my God, he stank. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was just disgusting. He took my blood for some research thing in return for, Cassie said as she rumbled through her bag to retrieve the cheque that he had handed her earlier. This, she said, handing the cheque over. Rani examined the note. It looked suspiciously familiar. She had dealt with fake notes with Sarah Jane when they first off Mrs. Wormwood. Could this be a similar affair, she thought? Rani had inherited Sarah Jane's watch scanner after she had died, which she flicked open so she could see what this cheque really was. She was right. There was something alien about the cheque. It was most definitely a fake. Whoever it was didn't intend Cassidy to check the cheque in. Which probably meant she was in danger, perhaps grave. Danger. It's a fake, Rani told Cassidy. Definitely a fake. In fact, there's something wrong about all of this. Yeah, Cassidy pondered. You know what I think? What? I think we need to do some investigating, Cassidy replied with a broad smile as she sat back to take a large chomp out of her bagel. Once they'd finished their lunch, they both decided to take a walk down the high street. The streets were quite soft, oddly, and winding, like a fine smoked tea in architecture. There was a light breeze swaying around them as they strolled up the high street. Cassidy looked in at some of the shops, desperately knowing that she couldn't afford any of them. That's when she spotted someone she could have sworn looked just like her. Rani, noticing that Cassidy had stopped in the middle of the busy street and turned to look at her. Are you okay? She asked. You look worried. Very worried. Cassidy snapped out of it. Oh, it's nothing, she said, looking down. Only I could have sworn... I'm sure it's nothing, she said, as she looked up to see the night drawing in, slow but steady like an oil lamp simmering out of existence. It was now evening, and the streets were consumed by shadows and phantoms of the dark. While the rest of the world was sleeping, it seemed only Cassidy, Rani, and the demons of the night were awake. They stuck to the shadows, moving around like elegant, undetectable ninjas, ready to get to the heart of this dark and abhorrent business. They had arrived at Quayside. It was as desolate as the night sky, and as silent as death itself. The water from the River Tyne drifted along like a distant traveller in a long coat, swaying to the pulse of two hearts. Cassidy had been here before, but not like this. She felt as if she was on the brink of something she shouldn't quite interfere with, yet she felt like a calling was coming towards her, telling her to go on. It was now evening, and the streets were consumed by shadows and phantoms of the dark. While the rest of the world was sleeping, it seemed only Cassidy, Rani, and the demons of the night were awake. They stuck to the shadows, moving around like elegant, undetectable ninjas, ready to get to the heart of this dark and abhorrent business. They had arrived at Quayside. It was as desolate as the night sky, and as silent as death itself. The water from the River Tyne drifted along like a distant traveller in a long coat, swaying to the pulse of two hearts. Cassidy had been here before, but not like this. She felt as if she was on the brink of something she shouldn't quite interfere with, yet she felt like a calling was coming towards her, telling her to go on. The streetlights provided little comfort as they dimmed quietly that night. They were light, subtle, and concealing the dark inside. Rani approached Cassidy from behind. "Let's do this," she said softly, as they went behind the intimidating office and through a back entrance. Cassidy had never been in this way. The back street was leading to this door, which felt cramped, and she felt as if she was a lemon ready for the squeezing. That's when she almost tripped and fell. She was unable to stop herself, but she put her hand to the ground, unable to see what she tripped on. Like a blind mouse, she felt all around and found a familiar tubular object. It was the same object from the news report. It hardly seemed possible. She thought it was in the hands of police investigators, yet here it was. It was almost like an anchor, pulling her into a world, a whole new world that she couldn't possibly comprehend. She pressed a button on the slider, and it illuminated the back street with hope, not provided by the street lamps, allowing her to see a path forward to a large, bulky steel door, with Rani in front of it, waiting for Cassidy to arrive. "What's that?" she asked. "I don't know, I just found it," Cassidy said, taking a look at it, examining the fine porcelain cracks and the crystal at the centre of the emitter, whilst holding it tight to the circular handle. Rani acknowledged this and turned to the door. "How are we going to get in? It's locked," Cassidy inquired, putting the sonic into the pocket of her leather jacket. "I've got a present from an old friend," she said, as she got out what appeared to be a gold-battered lipstick case. "A lipstick?" exclaimed Cassidy with an unnerving eyebrow lift. "This isn't any old lipstick. It's sonic," Rani explained as she took off the lid and twisted up the case to reveal a silver nib with a scarlet emitter on top. Rani pointed the lipstick at the lock of the door and then pressed down firmly on the button located at the base of the sonic. This created a rather irritating, buzzing din, accompanied by a bright crimson glow which encompassed the lock like a laser from a ray gun. There was an audible shook noise as the lock mechanism released. Rani pushed the door open. "After you," she said politely as Cassidy walked through. "Showing off much?" Cassidy teased as she was followed on by Rani. There was a large lever by the door which Cassidy pulled. This made a dim emergency light illuminate to reveal a staircase, which led deep underground, by the looks of things. Cassidy noted that there was even more of that slime she spotted earlier in the Zygote offices, this time soaking the walls almost like a wet paint. The potent perfume from hell that she'd smelt in the offices earlier that day was also present here, but more dense and toxic. It even seemed visible. It was like a tank of gas filling up. "Down the stairway to hell," Rani remarked as she tread carefully onto the first step and down into the canyon of despair. Cassidy was shaking a little, but she still followed on. The pathway was as rocky and unstable as a cliff, and it seemed like some of the steps were as jagged as knives. The journey down felt like an eternity, going on and on and on, until finally they reached the bottom of the dark tunnel. They entered what appeared to be some kind of hidden basement. They both felt a cold trickle of fear run down their necks. The room seemed dark and dingy, with mould consuming the room like a cancer reaching in to take apart the structure of the room. Plaster was hanging on the wall, like the last thread of a long scarf about to fall to their death. There was a strong wind coming from inside, and Cassidy and Rani felt compelled to go further down. There was a tunnel which if Cassidy had her geography right would lead directly under the River Tyne. She could hear the quiet drips of water, dropping, and felt like an intense heartbeat, drawing them further in. This way, Rani indicated to Cassidy as they followed the sound of the dripping. Cassidy homed in on this noise as if she was a mouse sniffing a cheese. It seemed so distant, yet so close at the same time. Rani ahead flipped open her scanner watch, but she used to scan the slime. As she did so, Cassidy noticed that she had a look of intense concern. "What is it?" Cassidy inquired, still distracted by the dripping. "It's hard to tell. There appears to be some human DNA structure. Your usual double helix structure, But there's something else too. It's like it's galvanizing itself and binding itself with the DNA structure of another species. It's sort of a hybrid." A new result popped up on Rani's screen. "It can't be." "What is it?" Cassidy asked, but she was met with no reply. "Tell me what it is," she commanded to know. "It's bad news. Double bad news. It's the DNA. It's sort of bonding, but it's bonding to that of a Zygon. A sort of shape-shifting alien," Rani explained. "So I was right then. Aliens," exclaimed Cassidy excitedly. Rani still looked worried. "It gets worse. The human DNA, it registers as your DNA print." There was a pause where Cassidy tried to understand what all this meant. "Whatever these Zygons are planning, you must be a big part of it," Rani stated. This was when there was a noise, like someone collapsed on the floor. Cassidy moved in to see who it was. "Hello? Is someone there? Do you need any help?" she called out. There was no reply, so Cassidy moved further in and out of view of Rani. This is when what seemed to be a wall shifted to reveal a red organic-looking door. Rani peered in, but she was grabbed by a ferocious creature and pulled in. Meanwhile, Cassidy found what looked like a dead body lying on the ground. They seemed still, lifeless, and wrapped in raggedy clothing which seemed far too big for them, almost like they were a kid in their dad's clothes. "Hello there," she said, crouching down beside them. From behind, the goo was mutating into a new form, slowly crunching together from red goo to limbs and then organs formed together until they came into what looked like an identical copy of Cassidy. The copy walked almost like a corpse or a scarecrow, jagged with its arms reaching out for Cassidy from behind. "Do you want me to call a doctor?" Cassidy asked. "I don't need a doctor," they said, looking up at Cassidy. They had a timeless look about them, and a whole universe of wonder in their eyes. Their hair was curled, and on one side it was shorter than the other. "Because I am the doctor, the original, you might say," they explained before falling unconscious again. Then, from behind, the copy revealed itself to Cassidy and clawed at her before thudding her against a wall, ready to drain the life out of her completely. Cassidy found herself on the brink between life and death.